Hello, welcome to Pirkei Avos with Rabeinu Yonah. We're in chapter 5, Mishnah 8. Shiva mine paranias bom la'olam al shiva gufi avera. 7 types of calamities come to the world based on 7 types of sins. Now he's going to go through different sins and write what the punishments are for different sins. Miktsasan ma'asrin and miktsasan eina ma'asrin. Ra'av shal batzeres bo. Miktsasan ra'evim miktsasan sveim. So there's a rule. Back in the day, still people who live in Israel still do this. We would tithe our food. A person has to take tithes from the food to give to the Kohen, the priest in the temple, and the Levium, those that serve the priest in the temple. So Meiser is 10% of one's crops that were given to the Levium in the temples. That was a requirement for all of the Jewish people. Now, what would happen if people didn't do that? So the Mishnah here says if people didn't do that, let's say some of the Jewish people were giving tithes and some weren't. So it says that hunger would come to the world, a famine would come to the world, but a type of famine where some people would have things to eat and some people wouldn't have things to eat. It says Rabeinu Yonah, Rav haba mipnei menias k'shamim be'itam, and it's the type of famine that happened because of a lack of rain. We're going to see that there are different types of famine. This specific type of famine happened due to a lack of rain. Miktsasim re'evim miktsasim sveim mida keneged mida shemiksasim ma'asrin miksasim eino ma'asrin. If in this specific case, since some people were giving tithes and some people were not giving tithes, so therefore, some people had enough to eat and some people didn't have enough to eat, and that was mida keneged mida, measure for measure. Okay, that's the first thing. Gomru shalola aser. Let's say nobody was giving tithes. Ra'av shel muhuma v'shel betzoras ba. A famine of muhuma and Betzoris comes. What is that? Rabeinu Yonah says, Zerav haba machmas milchama. This is the type of famine that happens because of war. So we have famine that happens we had earlier because of a lack of rain, so the crops don't grow. And this is a famine that happens because of war. And horrible things that happen to people. And therefore they can't plant their crops. They can't work the fields because there's battles going on. 2 days ago I was just at Monmouth battlefield, so I imagine if the Battle of Monmouth was happening every day, the folks back then wouldn't be able to plant their crops and they wouldn't be able to have anything to eat. Hashem sends all of this bewildering things, and they're all hungry. And in this case, where none of the people were giving tithes, so none of the people have what to eat. Because of the war, nobody can plant any crops. Okay. Now let's say a punishment in a different sin. People not giving challah. When you make a certain amount of bread, a certain amount of bread had to be taken off, and it was holy. So let's say you don't take off that certain amount of bread. If you're interested in this, learning about this mitzvah of challah, please send me a message. This is something we still do today. We can talk about it. Rav shel klaya bo. So a hunger of destruction would come to the world. What is a hunger of destruction? Well, the Rabeinu Yonah says here, this is a case where the Jewish people are not giving the tithes and are also not taking challah. So Rav shel klaya bo, shana shel yerdu gusham kolikar. He says this is a more serious type of famine where it didn't rain the entire year. V'hayu shamecha asher al roshcha, and he quotes a pasuk in Dvarim that the heavens above you shall be like copper. Ki al rov hapshayim paranias gedola ba. Since there were so many more sins, more punishment happened. What we're learning from here, the general thing is that our actions have consequences, not only in the next world, but even in this world. When we as a people serve Hashem properly, like we read in Shema every day, good things happen. The rains come, we have crops, the world is peaceful. But when we don't worship Hashem properly, God forbid, we don't fulfill the mitzvos, the commandments, bad things happen. Continues the Mishnah, Dever ba'olam, plague comes to the world. Al misas hamuras b'torah shelo nimtzru lebezdin. On the death penalty that isn't given over to the rabbinical court, that's mentioned in the Torah, Al perus shvius, and eating perus shvius. Now, what does this mean? Misos that aren't given over to bezdin. So there are certain death penalties in the Torah that are very serious. For instance, if a person murders somebody else, then the rabbinical court will put him to death. Or if someone desecrates Shabbos back in the day, and there was 2 witnesses warning him, and he said, I know that you're warning me and I'm going to do it anyway, in certain situations, the person would be put to death by the rabbinical court. But there are lower levels of punishments which come for sins which are not as serious, which is called which there is a spiritual death penalty, meaning that the rabbinical court won't put him to death, but something happens to his soul where the person is cut off from Hashem, that he'll die early, and things like that will happen. Those are called, these are misos shalonim sru lebezdin. So these are very serious sins, but they're not as serious as, obviously, the death penalty that the rabbinical court will actually carry out. An example of some of these sins are eating chametz, eating leavened bread on Pesach, because Pesach is very serious, or a man who doesn't have a bris, who's not circumcised, things like that, and many illicit relations, eating certain holy foods when a person is impure. So those types of sins. So for the committing those types of sins, it says plague comes to the world. What a plague? Okay, so he says increases Mrs. Bezdin, and he also an additional sin that plague brings to the world, which is not on this level. It doesn't incur the spiritual death penalty, but is just as serious for incursion of this penalty. Val perish shvius, during the Shemitah year, the sabbatical year, a person is not, during the sabbatical year, a person can't grow his crops and sell his crops. He just is allowed to eat it. So a person who sells his crops when he's supposed to be and when he's not supposed to be doing that will that'll bring about plague coming to the world. Okay, continues the Mishnah. Cherev bala olam. The sword will come to the world, meaning it sounds like violence will come to the world. Cherev usually could mean an invading army that kills people. What causes that? Al inoy hadin, ve'al ivus hadin, ve'al amorim b'torah shelo k'halacha. So he counts three things here. When a rabbinical court when a rabbinical court takes too long to paskin a shaila, takes too long to decide a case, meaning they know the judgment but they don't make the judgment, they just take a long time for no good reason. Val ivus hadin, this is when someone perverts the law. They know what the law is, but they pervert it and they give the wrong verdict. And the third thing is mora b'torah shelo k'halacha, someone who teaches Torah improperly. We'll see what this is. We said that. What does it mean to pervert the din? Is that you find the innocent person guilty and vice versa. Now, what's someone who teaches Torah improperly? So one example Rabeinu Yonah says is somebody who doesn't have rabbinical expertise and he hasn't learned enough, and yet he decides matters of Jewish law. And unfortunately, with the internet, especially, this is something that's been going on for a very long time, but especially now with the internet, it's kind of like on hyperdrive. Many people who have not studied the Talmud and not studied the books of Jewish law offer their opinions on matter of Jewish law. So Rabeinu Yonah says that is such a serious thing that it causes death and destruction to come to the world. Cherev, the sword, literally the sword. Now, what's the other example? The other example he gives is someone who is an expert. He knows what the law is. But guess what? For whatever reason, he's motivated. He says the wrong law. He teaches Torah improperly. He teaches Torah the improper way, for example. Unfortunately, you have people that studied back in the day, but they got a little misdirected along the way. And you find this very often, that people are influenced, let's say, by certain secular values. So they pervert the Torah to fit in with their secular values. They know better. They know that that's not what the Torah means, but they twist the Torah to suit their agenda or their personal agenda. Unfortunately, nowadays in certain movements in Judaism, you'll have people that really know better, and they'll pervert the Torah to fit their agenda. Very often they're motivated by secular values, and they will take the Torah and they'll just twist verses so that people who haven't studied in depth will be fooled by it. For example, there's an open Orthodox rabbi. For those who aren't familiar, open Orthodoxy is a movement that claims to be Orthodox but is actually really Reform or conservative. So this open Orthodox rabbi was speaking, and he said he supports same-sex marriage because it says in the Torah, "Lo tov hayos adam levado," that a man shouldn't be alone. So therefore, same-sex marriage must be okay. However, what he omitted was that the end of the verse says, "And that's why I created a wife for man," meaning man and woman. And obviously, he omits the verse in Leviticus, which is explicitly against that type of activity. And therefore, Jewish law is clearly against same-sex marriage. For more on that, you can send me a message. More than happy to discuss it. But that's an example of being Mora Torah Shelo K'halacha, of teaching Torah when you know better incorrectly. That is a very serious sin, which the Mishnah here says that destruction comes to the world. There's a marshal, very interesting marshal, on Tractate Bava Kama. he says that it's actually better that a person should give up his life rather than misrepresent Torah. Torah is such an important thing. It's Hashem's message for us of how to live our lives. It's a message from God. So how could we ever think of perverting it to fit our personal agenda? It's such a serious thing that the Marshal says one should give up his life rather than misrepresent words of Torah. Okay, so we're seeing that, we see from here that our actions have consequences. We learn from this Mishnah, and we see the importance and the integrity one needs to have in Torah learning, and how serious a person has to take it, and how when someone's learning Torah, he just has to be after the truth, to find the truth. And we should do this to know. We shouldn't be depressed after learning this Mishnah, but we should think that our actions have consequences for the better and for the not better, and we should try to do our best. Okay, wishing everyone a great day.